Okay, I think we will get started here. And if you haven't already done so, I'd like to let everyone know that there is a poll question. We are interested in knowing if you have had any experience in a few therapy methods. So you can find that poll question at the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and we'd love to have you participate in that poll. So our presenter today, Dr. Suzanne Carroll Duffy, can have an idea of where our audience is coming from. Um, so at that point, I would like to thank everyone for coming today. Welcome to the American Indian and Alaska Native Behavioral Health webinar series presented by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. I'm Kate Trams, and I'll be administering today's webinar. As I mentioned, Dr. Suzanne Carroll Duffy will be presenting Creative Therapy for Traumatized Children, the Moving Stories Play Therapy Method. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, or ATTC. We are one of 4 national focus centers which serve the ATTC network. The ATTC network is also including 10 regional centers and a network coordinating office. To learn more about our center, the network, or your regional center, please visit our website. Our next webinar in this series is scheduled for Wednesday, December 3rd, when Rose Dominic will present Traditional Indigenous Healing. We also offer the Essential Substance Abuse Skills webinar series each month. The next session in this series will be held on November 19, when Dr. Peter Nathan will present Clinical Evaluation Screening. For more information on our webinar series, you can contact me at the email address or phone number provided on this slide. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEHs for a $15 fee. The CEH request form is available for download in the Files pod in the webinar screen. I'll be also sending this form out to you in a follow-up email to all those who attended today's webinar. Immediately following today's webinar, we will be redirecting you to our GPRA evaluation. GPRA stands for the Government Performance and Results Act, and SAMHSA asks us to evaluate our events in order to comply with this act and provide improved performance assessment and accountability. The survey asks about your satisfaction with the event and will take less than 10 minutes to complete. We thank you in advance for helping us to improve our programs. Before we start today's session, I'd like to go over a few instructions for the Adobe Connect system. To view the presentation in full screen mode, click on the full screen button at the top right corner of the presentation pod, which looks like 4 arrows pointing outward. To return to the regular view, click the button again. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar. Please use the Q&A pod to share your questions and comments, and we will address questions at appropriate points during the presentation. We'd also like you to be aware that this webinar records participant attention time. If you minimize the webinar or are working in another window, the system will record your participation as inactive, which may be reflected in the number of CEHs received. The opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official position of CSAT, SAMHSA, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Suzanne Carroll Duffy. Dr. Duffy is a psychologist, leading play therapist, and speaker, having served the Passamaquoddy tribe in eastern Maine for the last 16 years. She developed a new tool called the Moving Stories Play Therapy Method, using her skills in play therapy, sand tray therapy, and bibliotherapy. And we are thrilled to have her with us to share this expertise and just hear her unique vision for therapy with children. So thank you so much, Dr. Duffy, and I will pass things over to you at this time, and just let me get your slides loaded up a moment.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to have this opportunity to share moving stories with people all across the country. And we'll be, in an hour, we'll just give you a little taste of how you might use the approach with classrooms, families, and also in individual sessions. So I'll start with a story of moving stories. Moving stories started with my children when they were in preschool, and I live in a really rural area of Maine, and we didn't have any good preschool programs. So some friends and I took turns leading programs for our kids. And so we took what was my office, and it was in a trailer. And so the kids called it trailer school. And so because it was my office and I had training as a sand tray therapist and also play therapist and also training in bibliotherapy, it was a great setting to integrate all of those things with stories for the kids in the preschool. So I have to credit um, my own children and some of my neighbors. And then from there it expanded into my workplace. And I got the idea for moving stories in part from someone in a totally different field. His name was Jerome Berryman, and he's actually an Episcopal priest. And what he did was he took the Montessori um, method and applied it to Bible stories so that each story that he wanted to teach in the Sunday school class had objects, and it was contained in beautiful trays or boxes and set up like a preschool setup. So it was a small step to think of how that might look in a playroom in my therapy work with kids. So I have to credit him for that basic idea. So this is an example of a moving stories kit. And they're called moving stories because inside the box are all the props you need to tell the story. And the theater for the story is a sand tray. And this approach integrates um, some of the tools that I find most useful working with kids, and that is bibliotherapy. I trained at St. Elizabeth's in DC and learned bibliotherapy there. Sand tray therapy, and anyone who has training in sand tray, and I see there's some of you do, there's different approaches. The approach that I have the most experience in is with Gisela De Domenico in the World Play approach to sand tray. And then it integrates play therapy. And so I've been training several different approaches to play therapy, um, starting with ecosystemic play therapy out of the California School of Professional Psychology, and then have picked up lots of other approaches along the way. So that's the story of moving stories, and this is what a moving stories library would look like. So in your playroom, you would have a part of the room that would have these containers that hold the characters and props for the story that you would tell. So it's like a three-dimensional therapeutic library. I call this special kind of playroom that has a whole center for moving stories, wonder rooms. And part of that is the feeling of wonder that kids experience when they walk into the playroom. And it's also the wondering that they do as they hear the story. So it's kind of a wondering process of what does it mean to them after they hear it in the sand tray. For those of you who aren't familiar with sand tray therapy, you can look and see all kinds of objects on the shelves here. And those represent every aspect of life. There's natural things, transportation, animals, religious things, cultural things, pretty much anything that's in the world. So anybody who's done some training realizes that yard sales are wonderful. Once you get into sand tray therapy, you become a collector of all kinds of things because you can imagine somebody needing it in their sand tray. Then right over to the side, you see this structure with the blue trays in it. I call that a multi-sand tray cart. And you can see there's a part that pulls out, and on the top of the pull-out part is a sand tray kit. And so in the Wonder Room, children have all kinds of expressive options. So these trays have different colors of sand. Some have red, black, One tray that's the most popular is called the everything tray. And in that tray, the kids are allowed to mix colors. And that is probably the tray that gets used 90% of the time. I also like one tray to be empty, and that tray might be for water, where they can actually pour water in it, or for certain stories when you need a sky, when the setting is up in the sky, then a blank tray is great for that. Um, there are standard sizes of sand trays depending on your orientation. The trays that you see right here are actually just about the standard size, which is it's designed to be like your, related to your vision. And these are actually just pizza dough trays, and they happen to be about the right size. This is another Wonder Room, and you can see that Wonder Room is just like any playroom that you would have in therapy. So there's imaginative play options, there's dress-up options, puppets. You can see the scarves, those are great for dressing up. Also classical things like dolls, balls, all kinds of art supplies. You might even have things for movement or music and for mastery kinds of play, different kinds of games. This is a moving story center. So this is actually in the trailer school where it all started. And in preschool or some of the younger grades, you could have a whole center of the classroom that has these stories and also sand trays. And so the idea is that the kids get to play with this, not just listen to you tell it, but they get to play with the story afterwards. This is what I call a wonder room on wheels. So one of the things that I've done here at the Beatrice Rafferty School on the reservation is I went to each classroom for 6 sessions, and I came to the class with this cart, and the top tray is the tray I told the stories in, and then you can see underneath are all kinds of little trays, and they were actually cake tins with covers on top and sand in them. And so after the kids heard the story, they had a chance to respond in their own creative way. And one of the ways that they might choose would be working in the sand tray. Other ways, you can see under here, there were art supplies, and I brought just the most basic objects, but the kids loved it, like popsicle sticks, rocks, marbles, a few little animals, some wooden pegs. You can also see here I have a puppet, which is I use to introduce the stories, a kit, and a rain stick to get their attention before telling it. So basically, the moving stories play therapy method is made up of 8 steps. And in the middle is the child space in your relationship. So it's really a dynamic model where, depending on who you've got in front of you, it might be a class, a family, a group, whatever the particular needs of that group, that's going to inform what parts of these steps you're going to use, and it's also going to inform how you're going to do those steps. So you might skip some of the steps, or one step you might do in a very non-directive way, an open way, and then in another context or with another child, you might do it in a much more structured way. So it's designed to assist the therapist to think through ideas of things they can do with the story, and also think of how to adapt it as they go and depending on what the context is. The moving stories method is a tool. So it's not a particular theory. So whatever your theoretical foundation is, you can take the ideas of telling the stories in the sand tray and apply it to this method in a way that is consistent with your theoretical approach. at this point in my own training, where I've been exposed to quite a few different approaches, um, I'm finding that I'm getting some theoretical grounding, and this is a new model to me. It's the play therapy dimensions model. And what I like about it is for those of us who like to pick and choose from different models, it gives you a structure to think through why you're discussing something directly or why you're choosing to go more into the metaphor of play, and even thinking about in one session when you're going to do that dance, like when are we going to play, when are we just going to directly talk about something, and how directive am I going to be. So that, just to put that out there as a model for people to consider, depending on what experience you have in play therapy. In the beginning, it's good just to pick a model and really learn that. So we'll start with talking about the child space and the relationship. And the context that we'll look at for the space are classroom, and I'm going to show you a short video on the presenting stage of the model in a Head Start classroom. And then I have people role playing. One of them is actually my child for the last one, to show how to do the creative expression stage of the model with a family. And then finally, this is the one with my child, how to document. In this example that we'll talk about for the classroom, the moving stories play therapy method will do almost all of the steps, but I chose not to do the document step when I was in the Head Start with this particular story. So we'll go through the steps of the method. Step one is, how do you select what story that you're going to tell? At the time that I did this the story at Head Start, it was at the beginning of the year. So a lot of kids were missing home and adjusting to being away from home. So I decided to do a story that would address that feeling of loss, like somebody's not here that I really wish was here. The next step is making the kit, and that takes a little time, but it doesn't have to cost a lot. Sometimes you can make objects out of Sculpey, or kids really use their imagination. You can use rocks, wooden pegs, sticks, and or I because I already am a sand tray therapist, it's easy. I just turn them to my shelves, and I usually have most of what I need to tell the story. Um, and then you practice the story ahead of time in the sand tray. So you don't have to have every word memorized of how to tell a story. You'd never do it if you had to do it that way. But you can plan out the basics. How's the story begin? What's the middle? What's the end? And how am I going to portray that in the sand tray in a way that really engages the kids? Sometimes I write my own stories, but at the end of the workshop today, I'll talk about a lot of other resources where you can find stories that you can make kits for. So now we'll go to step two. The story that I told was Wear Stripes. It was a story that was inspired by the kids in trailer school, and it was one of the ones that I told there. And because it's preschool, it tries to really engage the kids in very active ways. So we'll take 10 minutes or so to watch the presentation stage of the method at the Head Start school. Okay. So if you didn't get a chance to really hear it, I'll just summarize really briefly the presentation stage. You really want to include the kids. And um, if you can think of a way to help them make a sound or a movement or participate in the story, then you really have them engaged with you. The next step in the method is what I call the reflection stage. And this is a chance to sit back and think about what the story meant to you. So the next step in that video would have been asking them, what part was important to you? Or what part of the story did you like? And with preschool kids, especially if you say, where are you in the story? They are very concrete. Like, I'm the I'm the cow, I'm the dog. And as kids, there's no right or wrong answer. And as children respond to what the story meant to them, with a group or a classroom, I put my hand over the part of the tray that they're talking about and reflect back what they've said. So they are feeling heard and that there's no right or wrong answer. It's not like it's not school. It's not asking them what happened in the story. It's really inviting them to reflect on their own experience and share what it meant to them personally. The next step in the method is called the creative response step. And this can look really different depending on if you're in a class or with an individual or with a family. For this particular story in the classroom, I chose a structured activity because the kids were really young and I used up the time I had with them, and their attention spans are short. So we had a very structured activity, which was I invited them to color in a heart with as much missing feelings as they had. So it's teaching them um, to, to identify a feeling and also to express how much of a feeling and inviting them to color it in. Uh, the creative response step in a classroom like Head Start might also include a center, kind of like the one we looked at earlier from trailer school, where they have a chance just in their own free time to play with the story in a way that's original to them. And it's been so exciting in Head Start to, I have to go back and do screenings and classroom observations at times, and it's been really fun to go back and see the kids having their own center. And it's so popular that they actually have to put a timer on it, and they limit it to 2 kids at a time. And every 10 minutes, another 2 kids want to do it. And they love playing in the sand and then making their own story and making their own meaning out of what you've presented to them. The 5th step is sharing. Um, this happened informally when after the kids colored their heart, they had a chance to share with the teachers in the classroom um, what it was that they missed and how much they missed them. This can be particularly with an older group, like in the school, elementary school. This can be a really nice opportunity for kids to learn how to give feedback to each other and to really listen. And so part of the share step is teaching kids, how do you hear your classmate share what they've created? So maybe they made a story in the sand tray, maybe they did writing, or maybe they made a picture. And during the sharing time, the kids have to listen to each other. Sometimes I do that in pairs, and sometimes if it's a smaller group, I might try to do it as a whole group. The next step is document. I chose not to do this that for the session that we just watched, although I'm noticing that now when I go to Head Start, the teachers have their own Head Start criteria, and they are actually documenting. Another way to document, and this is consistent with people who've had sand tray therapy training, often you take a picture of the sand tray. that can be documentation. So whatever they create is, in a way, their own documentation. So it depends on, document step depends on what your needs are for how you're going to focus on it. The seventh step is homework and application. So in this example, the teachers were encouraged to use that exercise of coloring the heart for helping the children to identify and express their feelings. Now we're also sending notes home so that parents know what the story was. They have a copy of it. There's one or two suggested questions for them, and then suggested parent-child activities. So for example, there was a story that I told where the character has a magnifying glass and he's looking at his freckles. And so the parent-child activity that went home was count your child's freckles and do this playfully. So you can come up with different ideas for the homework or how you're going to apply what you learned from this story to life. The last step, the gift, this was inspired from my Santry training in the model with Gisela de Domenico, where the idea is after you've done a Santry, like created a world in a Santry, often there are symbols in that Santry that hold a lot of meaning. Sometimes you don't even have words for what's in your Santry, and yet you have a lot of emotion. So in that training, you might have somebody take a symbol with them and journal about it. And so symbols become representative of what was important that the person got from their Santry experience. So with moving stories, I like to have a symbol uh, where the child will remember what was meaningful to them in the story and include that for something that they can take home. And here's examples. If I'm doing a group with moving stories, we might make medicine bags, and that holds the symbol from each story that we do in the group. Or another idea is having, out of shrink-a-dink, they can make a picture of what was important to them, and then you heat it up in the oven, or you can even get like um, a like a hot like a really hot blow dryer and shrink it, and do a charm bracelet, or you might even do a keychain that has a symbol of what was meaningful to them in from the story series that you might be doing. Next, we have a video of working with families. Um, I'm noticing that it's 1:41, and I wanted to leave some time for questions. So I think I won't go into a lot of, I don't know, do you think it's worth trying to do the video again? Did most people get that?
If people want to respond in the Q&A, if most people were able to view the video, then maybe we would go ahead. But if not, we can include it, and have if Dr. Carol Duffy, if you wanted to just sort of describe for now, and then we can include it when we put the recording together. Um, and that way everyone can view it at a later time as well.
Okay, so I'll talk about it, and then it's about a 4-minute video, and so the ideas for working with families, sometimes I will do a check-in at the beginning of a family session, and you listen for what are the issues. And now and then you have in your moving stories library already a story that speaks to the theme that they've talked about. And so sometimes we'll start with a story, and I'll adapt it to whatever the situation is to the child. So if the child is male, I make the character male. And the main thing is to match the feeling and to provide something in the story that maybe they're missing in terms of problem solving. Um, some parents can be great at helping with healing metaphors because they really know their child. And the way I build a story usually starts with a metaphor for what I feel like they might need, and parents can help in that process. Um, Parents also can learn non-directive play therapy skills. For some of you who already have some training in play therapy, a popular model is the filial therapy model, where you're really teaching parents how to hear their child's play. So oftentimes I'll tell a story and then step away and invite the parent to sit across from the child next to the sand tray, and they practice skills like not asking too many questions, giving them 100% of their attention, reflecting back the feeling the way that a therapist would do. And they're learning those skills and they're taking them home. And so it's they're holding the space for the child after they've heard the story and are doing their own creative response. Sometimes the stories can be used to help facilitate family discussion. And in the video, what you'll see is a story that's really good with siblings and teaching them a skill. So hear a story that teaches them about conflict resolution, and then they're invited to play in the same sand tray and work out the challenge of doing that. So that's what you'll see in a video with, they aren't clients, they're just role-playing kids. So in the step of the method that you'll be seeing, you won't see me doing the whole story. You'll just see the very end of the story, and then about 4 minutes of the creative response time that the kids have in the tray. And one of the things that you'll notice is, like, when you've invested in finding a story, maybe even writing a story, making a kit, presenting it, you really want the kids to play with it, right? Because you put so much into it. And what will often happen is kids might totally take out your story and go to the sand tray shelves and start all over with something else. And so you'll see that in the video. But then what's interesting is, and this often happens later, you see what you've done integrated into their own story. So that's what the video will show you. The other application is with individuals. Um, I mentioned already, you can really tailor the stories. You might have written or made a story for a particular case, but you can keep it on your shelf and use it with lots of other kids by really on the spot matching their emotional themes and basics like their sex. I often skip the reflective step of the method in individual sessions, and that's the step where you invite them to wonder about it, and it's very verbally oriented. The children, when you're in the individual session, they are so eager to play with the story. I've found that taking them into their heads disrupts the flow sometimes. So that's a part of the method where at the center is your relationship with the child and what's happening in the moment. So I often will skip that step and I'll finish my story, pause, and then just say, now it's your turn to play. And at first I said, now it's your turn to tell a story. And kids would freeze. That it was a little bit intimidating for some kids to be like, I have to do a story? But if you just say play, and then they know what to do. They just jump in. And you've modeled telling a story. So I've found that the children's play holds together like a story. And I observe it and hear it as if it's a story. And what you'll see in the third video, it's just a few minutes with my son and I, is basically me letting him know the story that I heard in his play. And lots of times kids are just, they're playing, they're telling the story as they go. It goes in all kinds of directions. But it's such a great challenge as a therapist to stop and think, this is a story, and I need to really pay attention. Like, how does it start? What's the middle? What's the end? And and I'm going to check in with him at the end. So I'll say, oh, thank you for your story. So I frame their play like a story, and then I'll say, now let me know if I heard it all, and I summarize what I saw, and then I have them take a picture of the last part of their story, and I'll document it, and we can actually look at this. This would be an example of a documentation that's intended for the children, but honestly, it holds a lot more meaning than a soap note in terms of what really happened in a session. So they're invited to make a title, and there's a picture of the end of the story. And then it might be their words if they wanted you to like write it down as they were going. Some kids do. Or it might just be your summary of what you saw, and especially for littler kids. And they'll let you know when you miss something. So that's what you see in the video too. There are lots of resources for uh, getting stories. I'll go over that quickly. And also on the method. This year, just actually this month, there's a book that's out, Creative Interventions with Traumatized Children. The editor is Kathy Malkidai. And so I wrote a chapter in that book. So that provides a good introduction to how to use the method with traumatized children in particular, and I focus on an individual approach in that chapter. In 2015, a book will be coming out. I think this is going to be the title. I think it's a working title. The use of creative therapies with depression. And that chapter will be describing how to use moving stories with groups, with a focus on depressed kids. Um, I have a website. It's called Vivacy Seminars, and I have a Moving Stories e-library there. So there's a e-book that describes the method, and then these are the stories that I have in there now. These are the ones that I've written, and these are some of my students have written these. Um, this affect regulation on cloud flies in airplane, we're all as child therapists looking for ways like, how do I teach breathing? Like, it's hard to get kids engaged in that, and Cloud Flies in Airplane is a great way to do that. And you can actually go on my website and see a video of Lauren telling that story. Here are a few articles that I've written, and these are books with many stories. So the one that I'll highlight are Nancy Davis's. She's got very short stories, and they're powerful metaphoric healing. And she's actually the one, a student of hers is the one who helped me feel confident that I could write my own therapeutic story, and she, using a metaphor as the seed for the story. And so she has 2 books, and they are particularly good for kids who've been traumatized. A great blog, this is a school counselor who every week, and sometimes more than once a week, will review a book that she really loves that she's using in her class. And so that's a great source for books. For people interested in Santre therapy, Gisela De Domenico has a good book, the Santre Therapy Practical Manual. That's a really good beginning book. Bibliotherapy, the classic is this bibliopoetry therapy, the interactive process. Play therapy, here are some play therapy resources that also address story and Santre, some of them. and this is a good book on children and metaphor. And Jerome Berryman was the one who was the seed of the idea for me in making stories three-dimensional. So, so that's my contact information. I'd love to hear from people, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Carol Duffy. And we are but we do have a couple of questions so far, and please feel free to continue to submit questions, and we will get to as many as we can. But we did have a question, and this came in kind of when you were starting to talk about um, how to or one of the things you were talking about right when this question came in was um, when a child brings up an issue that you sort of create a story that includes that issue. And so Tanya's question is what are some good strategies in working with children with trauma? So I wonder if you could elaborate that on a little bit more.
Sure. I think moving stories is really great for traumatized kids because um, sometimes it's hard to for kids directly to approach the trauma, and so it's a gentler approach than you know some others. You can teach the skills that the kids need through the story. Like a traumatized child really needs self-regulation, and you can teach that through a story where the character is out of control and learns how to breathe down. That's what Claude does. Or maybe a traumatized child might feel damaged. So a story that helps them to feel that they're not damaged and that this was a small piece of what happened to them in their life. Um, I think there's a lot of, I think what play therapy brings to some of the evidence-based approaches like trauma-focused kind of behavioral therapy is for kids who don't quite have the language yet. It gives them play as a language to express how they're feeling. And also, there's some really interesting um, research about the brain in trauma and how sand tray is very calming for them. And I think Bruce Perry talks about really you want to match where they are developmentally, and some kids might be older but really need to return to some of the very beginning developmental steps of self-regulation and play. So I think play adds that to it. And what I like about my own method, the moving stories method, is it kind of combines the play with language. So I think there's a lot of growth. The kids are engaged. They're speaking their language, which is play, but they're also learning um, uh, verbal language at the same time.
Great. So we have another question from Sandra. She is interested in knowing the age groups that can be targeted for this type of therapy.
I'd say the youngest I've done it with is 3, and the oldest, believe it or not, I do a lot of trainings with therapists, right? And they're all adults, and they can have very powerful experiences um, through stories that were maybe written for children even. So I think the idea of using symbol and story goes across ages. But the trick is to choose your story and to choose your symbols in a way that is appealing to whatever age group you're working with. And also to think about how your presentation is maybe going to shift. So for adults, you might pick things made out natural objects, wood, clay, just a simple symbol to put out as you're talking. With younger kids, they love animals, so you just have to tailor it. But the idea of story and symbol goes across all ages.
Great. All right, and a question from Anne. Is this something that could be used in substance abuse treatment with adults who have who have had traumatic experiences as a child?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I haven't done that myself, but I think just based on my experience doing stories in Santray with adults, I definitely think it could. And you'd have to know your client. Um, some clients feel like the Santray things are childlike, so you kind of have to orient them. Sometimes I'll say, um, it's like a dream. If the symbols represent more than you can find words for right now. And I think with some orientation, everybody loves a story, so I think you just have to tailor it um, so that it's appealing with what objects that you choose.
And we had another comment from Tammy, who, if you didn't notice, at the very beginning of the webinar, she was asking about, or in mentioning child-parent psychotherapy, a program that she had encountered, and included a link. So that is included. You'll see that in the Q&A conversation at the very beginning. So please check that out if you're interested in that. And we have another question from Amanda. Would you suggest using this kind of therapy with seriously mentally ill clients? Some clients have traumatic brain injury, mild mental retardation, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
I haven't used it with seriously mentally ill clients, like schizophrenic, let's say, but certainly like seriously depressed or bipolar. Um, you know, I, I'm thinking about children. I think most diagnostic groups could benefit from it. The way a child with mental retardation would benefit, you wouldn't want it to be heavy on the metaphor because they probably aren't going to get the metaphor, but you might be able to teach a skill with it. And certainly the play for a child who's mentally retarded would be really helpful. And then fetal alcohol syndrome, I think, um, some of that is problems with attention, and in a way, I think it'd be easier to approach it with kids with FAS with play than, more heavily verbal approaches. But you wouldn't want, if there's cognitive limitations for the child with FAS, you just have to pick the story right. You want to make sure it's not some hidden message, make it concrete.
All right, we have another question from Tanya. Is in regards to the play therapy room, is there a particular way the room should be set up? She said she noticed shelves with various toys placed on each shelf. Is there a system to that, or?
There is a system. Part of it depends on what the model of play therapy is that you're using. And for my model, I've kind of got a sand tray therapy set up. That's all the little objects that you saw. That's classic sand tray therapy kind of setup. And then I usually have the moving stories centered near that. And but it depends on your orientation for what particular toys you'd even have in a playroom. But from my Wonder Room perspective, you would want to have expressive play therapy toys, art, games, and it doesn't really matter if they continue to work in the sand tray. Anything in the room, to me, is a response to the story that's important.
Okay. And then Kelly mentioned that the links that Tammy had sent were not working, so I am trying to, I found the page she was working from. It's the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which is nctsn.org. And then I am hoping that these new links that I am sending will work for people to be able to access those fact sheets about the child-parent psychotherapy. Um, and that looks like all of the questions that we have for now. So before I show those other videos, Dr. Carol Duffy, did you want to say anything else?
Just thank you. I'm so excited to have the opportunity, and I hope that if anyone has questions, to contact me.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank everyone so much. No problem. Thank you so much, Dr. Carol Duffy, and
Okay.
we really appreciate you sharing this with us, and look forward to continued collaboration and hearing more about your work. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.